Today, the Tacoma gets some rock sliders. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you guys are all staying healthy and safe. As you guys know, in a previous video, I went ahead and painted these new rock sliders I received, and today we're going to install them. Now for the rock sliders, I decided to go with the Cali Raised Trail Series. Now these are 25-degree rock sliders, along with a kick out right here in the rear. The reason I went with these guys is I really don't need a step for my roof rack. And on top of that, I'm kind of looking for a more of a sleek and low profile look, and these guys will do the trick. Now, these rock sliders are of steel construction. Essentially, this is a 1 3/4 inch dom tubing, which is essentially industry standard for most of these rock slider manufacturers. And these will definitely get the job done while I'm out on trails and so on. Also, they do make these as a weld-on option, a bolt-on option. I opted for the bolt-on option. That way I can do it myself since I don't know how to weld. So for the installation, I'm thinking it'll take us about 2 hours to do both sides with shooting this video. Now, without talking too much, let's get into it. All right, so first thing, I'm gonna start on the driver's side of the truck. First up, we have to remove these two 12mm nuts and then also this 12mm bolt. So let's do that real quick. Now these little nuts are holding this box onto the chassis. I'm just gonna move this to the side and just let it dangle there. And also do the same with this guy here. Next up, we need to loosen the brake line from the chassis right here. In order to do that, all we have to do is just push these two white little clips in. And to do that, you're just gonna press on them and push them through. And next up, what we need to do is we need to separate this little wiring loom from the frame. It's just being held on by clips, so I'm just gonna use a flathead right here. Just pry it off. And then once we have that off, what we need to do is we need to remove this little plug here and this guy up front. Again, using a screwdriver. On some models, these will be stickers. Either way, we need to pull this guy off and this one. So let's do that real quick. All right, so next up on the inside of the frame, we have to remove this little bracket that's holding our brake lines in place. Again, we're just gonna use a 12mm here. We're just gonna gently pull this out of place without bending the brake lines too much. That's good. And then next, there's another 12mm bolt holding this little splash guard or whatever this is, this little plastic piece. We have to remove this as well. And then we're gonna just pull this little splash guard off. There is some adhesive on here and we're just gonna pull. There we go. Next up, we're gonna remove this 14mm bolt on the back side of the frame, and we can remove this on both sides of the frame. And hold on to this guy. We are essentially gonna use this one bolt to hold the rock slider in place as we install the rest of the hardware, so just keep this handy. Okay, next up on the passenger side, we're gonna remove this little box. Essentially, to do that, we need to pull off these two 10mm bolts. And then next up, we're just gonna remove these two bolts right here. Yeah, we're gonna put that to the side. All right, so next up what we're gonna do is we're gonna prepare the hardware to install the rock sliders. First up, you're gonna grab this piece right here with this little square hole. Grab one of these little clip-on little nuts, bolts, whatever they are. We're gonna pop this guy in. Like so. And then essentially, we're going to pop this guy into the cross member where we remove one of the little plastic plugs. One thing to remember, essentially your bolt will go in through here and just pull this in. So we got this one done. The next step, we need to prepare this guy as well. Again, this is your little handle, and we're gonna do the same thing by grabbing these two guys. One thing to keep in mind, you wanna put these guys on the little short end like so, rather than on the long end. So we're gonna pop them in. like that. And remember, these guys go in on the little side right here where this kind of like goes in like that. Okay, perfect. So now we have these two guys done. Next up, let's throw this guy into the cross member. And then after that, we'll throw this guy into also the little frame piece. And then after that, we're ready to install our rock slider. All right, first up, we're gonna take this guy and pop him into the cross member here. And just make sure the little flat piece here is pointing towards us. So we're gonna put this guy in right here. And if it drops in, don't worry about that. You'll be able to essentially slide your finger in right here, move this guy in to place once we're ready for that. All right, next up, we're gonna take our little handle and slide it in right here behind the brake lines and the little plastic cap we took off. Just slide it in. I'm gonna leave that guy in here for now. Essentially, we're gonna use this handle to line up two front bolts on the rock slider. Now that we are done, we are ready to throw the rock slider on. All right, now we are ready to mount these bad boys onto the truck. A couple of things I do want to note. So essentially the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to lift these guys into place. And if you guys remember, we removed that 14mm bolt from the rear right here. Essentially that bad boy goes right here on the rock sliders. So we're gonna lift this into place. We're just gonna throw that guy in. I'm just gonna finger tighten it. And that should essentially hold the whole rock slider into place. And then we'll start working on installing the rest of the hardware. When it comes to the rest of the hardware, one thing I do wanna note, so on the front side panel here, you're gonna have 3 of these bolts that are going to go through the rock slider, through the frame. So essentially with these bolts, you're gonna have your bolt, your little washer, and it's gonna go through the frame. You're gonna have this little blocking plate from the back side. It's gonna pinch this down. Again, another washer and then your little nut. So one thing I do wanna note here, so on the driver's side, because we do have the little control unit over there that we took off, the back 2 bolts, they go in from the outside in. And then this front guy, you guys are gonna have to slide the bolt through the back side to the front. And then that's where we're gonna attach this. And then on the front bracket right here, as you guys remember, we put in that handle through the frame. That's where these 2 guys go. And then that little long guy and the cross member will come in through here. Now, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lift this guy into place. I'm gonna use this 14mm to hold it in place, and then I'll go through and tighten up all the bolts, and then I'll show you guys where all the bolts go. Just because it's kind of awkward and I don't have a tripod that goes low enough, it might be a pain in the ass to show the whole install. So what I'll do is, again, I'm gonna throw it up, and then once I have it into place, I'll show you guys all the bolts all tightened down. And then finally to note, these guys right here, these 3, this is where our little clamps are gonna go, and I'll show you guys how to install those as well once this is on the truck. So let's go ahead and get this onto the truck. Alright guys, so I just realized that my camera didn't record me going through installing all the hardware on the rock slider, so I'll just run you guys through exactly what I did. So once I threw up the rock slider into place, I put in this little 14mm bolt. Then I went through and installed the little side bolts on the side, so that one, and you got one behind the little bar right there. And then this guy right here. Once I had those guys in, I went through and added the 2 bolts right here on the front. Now these guys went into the handle that we threw in, and then this bolt that went into the little thing that we slid into the crossbar. And then as I mentioned earlier, then on the inside of the little frame, we're going to use these little clamps. And essentially you're going to use your bolt, little spacer, clamp, your little washer, and then your little locking nut. And you got 3 of these essentially on all these little tabs. You have to do 1. And then one thing to keep in mind on these guys right here, the front 2 bolts will be the shorter bolts, and your backside one will be the longer bolts. And that's pretty much it. So once you have everything in place, go through and make sure everything is nicely centered and tighten everything down. And there we have it for the install. Now, as I mentioned earlier, something happened with the memory card to where it errored out, and I lost a lot of the footage as far as the install. Primarily, I lost the footage of me throwing all the bolts in and showing you guys, where that goes. However, very simple, as I mentioned earlier. Once you guys have the rock slider into place, you can just throw that 14mm bolt back in. that should hold the rock slider essentially in place. At that point, what I did was I threw all the bolts in that I needed to, just finger tight on all of them. Once I'd done that, I went through and made sure that I was happy with the alignment of the actual rack itself. So you can actually, just the way that all the bolt holes are actually dialed out, you can move them back and forth a little bit. Once I was happy with that, I made sure that I was happy with the alignment. Once I had that, I just went through and tightened everything down. And then also, once you, on the driver's side, have that in, you can put that little black box back in through the rock slider, tighten it down, and also with the little brake line clips, throw those back in. You repeat the exact same process on the passenger side. Now, my total install time was recording the video, took about 2 hours, so this is a very simple process, and I would highly recommend this. I wouldn't even mess with doing a weld on. I do believe that with pretty much how sturdy and tight this is, this will be perfect for what I needed to do. Now, one thing I did notice on the truck pretty much instantly, and I should have measured my suspension on this, I do feel like that my truck is a little bit lower with the excessive weight on it now. So one thing to keep in mind that I do feel like you might lose a little bit of ground clearance. I don't think it's that noticeable, but I just think it is happening. But it's a good thing because next up that we're going to be doing, we're actually going to be upgrading suspension on the truck. So if you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure you are, so that way you guys get informed of when we're doing that. Now, I hope you guys found this video informative. If you did, drop me a like below. And until next time, I hope you guys have a great day. See ya.